financially. And that's okay, but that's just for public consumption, because behind the scenes, America and China and Britain, for example, a few years ago, the globalists, including the Carlyle Group and others, basically dictated to the Communist Chinese that you've got to put up for sale your largest manufacturing company in China for building these giant cities that they're... So 80% of the world construction is occurring in China right now. And guess who owns the construction companies and the major large equipment manufacturer? It's all the Carlyle Group that's owned by the British royals, George Bush Sr., and the Saudi Arabians. They're the ones that own it all. So it's all integrated. And Chinese were set up originally by the British, and then Mao Zedong was basically a British operative. So the idea that somehow they're separate, they're just playing part of their game. It's like cops and robbers, so that they can maintain their position in this new order that's going to be developed with Russia and China and America and these other nations jockeying for a position at the trough to be right now it's the G20, the top 20 nations that make 75 to 80% of the world's economic output.
We also have a whistleblower that talked about what he calls the Egypt Accords, where the world was divided up into North and South America goes to the United States, Europe goes to Russia, and China gets the Far East. Is that something you're familiar with? Yeah,
the trilateral world, that makes sense. It's totally logical. Right now, Europe is totally in the grip of Russia, and China does get control of Asia, and they're making deals now with Japan, which you'd never expected 20, 30 years ago, and with the South Koreans. So I agree. I think that makes total sense, although among that three zones, or three areas, three if you want to call it colors, the blue color being the Western alliance, North and South America under America, and the red, let's say Russia and Europe, and the yellow being all the Asian countries. Those are literally seem like the colors that are right out of the Bible for the resources. And the policies that I saw back in 97 when I traveled to HLI was they wanted to reduce the population in the third world dramatically, just like Henry Kissinger stated, so that they could utilize their resources on into the 21st, 22nd, and subsequent centuries. This New World Order system they're trying to set up is to survive Earth changes and to survive with a core population that will plunder the resources and prevent these nations from interfering with the survival of the first and second world.
Okay, well, speaking of Earth changes, you also said you had some correct info that would correct some of the things that Patrick Gerald had been talking about. And with the movie coming out this weekend, 2012, it'd be an ideal time to talk about that.
Yeah. So, in other words, I think what people should do is, number one, just close up on the economic one. They need to get out of the dollar in the sense of, if they have dollar denominations, to get into silver and gold. Number two, they need to be as low in debt or debt-free as they can, to be, in other words, be mobile and quick. They need to be by country if they can, or by continent, so that they have to travel because there's disturbances or martial law or whatever they can, or be able to protect themselves if there's a plague that spreads or political breakdown, because in fact the political breakdown may be more serious than the actual airborne plagues, either this or a biological weapon. Talking about the Earth changes, and I looked at the interview from Patrick Gerald, and I've also listened to the information from Cliff High, and I disagree with both of them. There's evidence, if you look back through the geological record, that there's been electromagnetic pole changes occur every roughly 11,500 to 11,800 years, down through history. But there haven't been subsequent species die-offs. In other words, you haven't seen the massive 95% die-off of the species during those 11,500 to 800 years. And yes, there have been physical pole shifts where there's been giant tsunamis that have struck, such as a giant one that was probably thought to hit somewhere probably around 40 to 50,000 years ago, that struck the Altiplano Plateau of the Andes Mountains and probably went as high as 11,000 feet. So there's some evidence that it has happened before, but the most common thing is actually what's called a crustal slip, which is not a full pole shift. Right now already we've had a magnetic shift that's already occurred three major shifts since 1997. And if you look at the actual position of the axial pole, somewhere around 500,000 years ago, the axial pole of the North Pole was actually near Northbury, Ontario, Canada. It's moved a number of times since then, but it shifted maybe 1,000 miles or 800 miles, whatever. It hasn't shifted where the pole is actually flipped or moved so that the whole axis of the Earth has changed. And that's because of the inertial momentum of the continents, which are very massive, as well as the drag of the magma and the structure of the Earth itself. So I saw some of the diagrams that were posted up and some of the information that they're referencing on, and they're expecting that the magnetic flux fields of the sun are what flips the magnetic field of the Earth, so therefore you get a pole shift. I can say categorically, a pole flip rather than a slip is not going to occur. There's going to be a slip, but it'll be very slow. In fact, the best way to describe it, and this is also in the Hopi prophecies and others, is that if you would move the Earth as fast as Gerald talked about, the atmosphere would heat up so much, everything in every life form would be incinerated from the temperature because it would probably rise to about 10,000 degrees. So, number one, that has never occurred. If it happens, it's something that slips because of internal viscosity in the Earth and the magma. And the most likely thing is it's going to move at something like 1.6 miles per hour, which over a period of months would move the pole 1,200 miles. So 1.6 miles an hour is about half as fast as I walk. So that's not very fast, and it's not going to cause any friction. The position also that he mentioned in terms of areas where survival was disturbing, because he can't predict where it's going to go and how far it'll slip. I can tell you from other information I have, which is another story, that in fact there will be Earth changes, and there's a number of maps that have been published by intuitives over the decades. And the position of North America will be moved 1,200 miles south, not north. And that the movement of Russia and Northern Asia are going to move 1,200 miles north, so the pole will actually reside inside the territory of Russia after this event. The primary thing that people need to be concerned about is a solar mass ejection and a collapse of the magnetosphere, which can occur very temporarily. We're talking about partial to complete collapse. It may be partial for days or weeks and complete for maybe hours. And during that time, if you're outside, you'll be irradiated with high-energy ultraviolet light and the danger of exposure to X-rays and cosmic rays. And there is good evidence that there are evolutionary leaps that occur besides the die-off of species that occur which are not complete. And I've had discussions with Robert Felix about this, and you might want to have him on your program. And also, if you haven't already had him, Larry Joseph, because we're following the issue of the magnetosphere, because it's a giant magnetic hole between the tip of Antarctica, on the eastern side of Antarctica, and the South Atlantic, all the way to the tip of South Africa, that if you go out into space, NASA just did a major flypast to 5 satellites and proved it in their own documents, which I have posted up on the site, that there's a giant magnetic sphere hole that...
Does that include part of Ecuador, or is that a different...
No, it's basically the South Atlantic, between the tip of South Africa, south of South Africa, all the way to Antarctica, and basically kind of a empty part of the South Pacific.
Okay.
But there's a giant magnetic hole, and that's already there. It's documented. NASA's already put their data up, so it's not even open to dispute. The other thing is there's 2 areas where there's already been a magnetic pole reversal. There's a North Pole zone in the South Atlantic near Antarctica, and there's a North Pole that's flipped to south in the North Atlantic. And what it's also doing is it's allowing high-energy ultraviolet C light to come through, which can melt ice. So besides the volcanism, which occurs in the, if you want to call it the Earth's radiator, which is about a 23,000-mile-long band in the interoceanic ridge, and in an area called the Gakkel Range, which is about 1,500 miles long in the Arctic. It's a volcanic ridge anywhere from 2.5 to 3 miles down. Some of these volcanic mountains are as tall as the Swiss Alps, and they're venting out quadrillions of BTUs of energy every minute. And it's the primary driver of the world's climate. Besides the sun, is the amount of thermal energy generated at ridges like the one off the Galapagos Islands, 1,000 miles off the coast of the western coast of South America. It's a volcanic ridge under a giant oceanic trench.
It must be connected with El Nino.
Yeah, in fact, it's the cause of El Nino. The El Nino is simply this giant volcanic trench